Welcome to Quietly Thinking Out Loud. Before I begin, I may never know your name, but thank you for being here today. There is something life has taught me over the years about trust. For a long time, I believed that trust was simple. If someone had been in my life for many years, I assumed I understood who they were. And if someone was a friend, trust naturally followed. If familiarity existed, I believe safety existed there too. And because trust was present, I stopped paying close attention, not consciously, quietly, almost automatically. Life eventually taught me something difficult. Trust itself is not the problem, but sometimes trust becomes the very reason we stop observing clearly. We assume familiarity means safety. We assume history means loyalty. We assume closeness guarantees transparency. But human beings are far more complicated than the stories we build about them. Over time, I learned something uncomfortable. Sometimes the people closest to us are not necessarily trying to harm us, but closeness doesn't remove self-interest. People carry needs, fears, personal agendas, insecurity, ambition, and sometimes these things quietly influence how they behave, even within relationships that build on trust. I used to believe that trust meant understanding, that if someone had been in my life long enough, I understood their intentions. But experience taught me that knowing someone for years doesn't automatically mean we continue seeing them clearly. Sometimes familiarity creates assumptions, and assumptions can quietly become blind spots. There is another part of disappointment we rarely talk about. When trust is broken, we often focus on what the other person has done, the lies, the betrayal, the hidden intentions, the disappointment. But over time, I began understanding that sometimes the deepest injury is not what others have done to us. Sometimes the deepest injury is what quietly happened to our own dignity while we were not paying attention. Because loss of dignity rarely happens all at once. It happens slowly, bit by bit. We overlook small discomforts. We silence our own questions. We ignore the uneasy feeling that something may not be quite right. We accept explanations because trust already exists. We continue believing because familiarity feels safer than doubt. And little by little, something inside us begins adjusting. Not because we are weak, but because trust makes us lower our guard. Then one day truth arrives, and suddenly everything begins recognizing or reorganizing itself. We often look backward. Then the signs were there. The discomfort was there. The questions were there. But we kept choosing trust over observation. And perhaps this is why some disappointments hurt more deeply than a heartbreak itself. Because heartbreak is one thing, but hating ourselves for not recognizing what was happening sooner is another thing entirely. Because at some point, dignity becomes involved. And by the time we finally understand what happened, it is not only trust that feels broken. Sometimes it feels as though our own dignity has been bruised along the way. I understand very well how difficult that moment can be. Not because someone disappointed us, but because we trusted our own judgment. And suddenly we are forced to ask ourselves difficult questions. How did I not see this? Why did I ignore what I was feeling? Why did I continue believing despite discomfort? And perhaps this is the hardest part, not forgiving others, but learning how to forgive ourselves for what we fail to see clearly. Maybe we misunderstand what maturity really means. Maturity is not becoming suspicious of everyone. It is not learning how to trust no one. It isn't becoming bitter because life disappointed us. Maybe maturity is something quieter. Maybe maturity means understanding that trust is valuable, but trust should never replace awareness. I learned this lesson in very practical ways too. In business relationships, I now prefer clarity, even when trust existed. I used to feel uncomfortable putting agreements into a contract, especially with people I knew very well. But life taught me otherwise. I eventually learned that clarity protects trust, not because people are bad, but because assumptions create unnecessary misunderstandings. Sometimes the strongest relationships are the ones where expectations are clearly understood. And perhaps life keeps teaching us the same lesson repeatedly. Do not stop observing simply because trust exists. Human beings can act sincerely while still carrying their own invisible motivations. And none of us are immune to misunderstanding people. Life teaches all of us difficult lessons about trust. Some lessons are painful, not because others disappointed us, but because we eventually discover something difficult about ourselves. We trusted our own judgment, and sometimes we were wrong. But perhaps healing doesn't begin the moment we understand what others have done. Perhaps healing begins when we stop punishing ourselves endlessly for what we fail to see. Because we were not foolish, we were human. We trusted, we believed. We saw people through the lens of who we hoped they were. And maybe maturity begins the moment we stop asking only what others have done to us and begin understanding how to rebuild trust in our own ability to see clearly once again. Because life teaches many lessons about people, and perhaps one of the hardest lessons is learning this. Trust is beautiful, but trust should never ask us to stop paying attention. And wherever you are, thank you for being here with me today. Until next time, take care.